What led you from kitchen to co-founding the Pebble Food Company?
My name is Jim Fuller. I've come from Australia. I found the job on the mushroom farm and everything sort of changed for me.
Jim, what was that one aha moment where you realized that mushroom could change to the food industry?
It was whenever I realized that on this mixing for the food system. So that was my aha moment.
My question for you is, how did you develop the texture and umami depth in Pebble mushroom-based meat?
The best mushroom for me to use was shiitake, taste of mushroom and texture of mushroom.
Who are your main customer or target audience for Pebble? Are they flexitarian, vegans, chefs, or someone else?
Yeah, well, I answer that with all of those are the right answer. You know, there's an easy, fast market with the vegans. Vegans want...
And what is the main purpose of your visit to India?
Crazy ideas. Your technical partner in your business has already said very low cost.
And recently you make a visit to Kanchi Dham.
Neem Karoli Baba, and I offered my bracelet to be blessed. This little token with Lord Hanuman. I talk about this at length on other podcasts, and it takes a long time to discuss the entire science.
Hello everyone, and this Planet Mushroom podcast, we have a very big name guest in India, and his name is Jim Fuller, a chef turned mycologist and a co-founder of Pebble Food. So Jim, can you introduce yourself to our audience in India, like about your journey, of what you do, a basic idea of your work?
Sure. Well, thanks, Naveen. My name is Jim Fuller. I've come from Australia. Originally, though, I'm from the United States, so I've lived in Australia for about 20 years. I've been involved in mushrooms just a little over 20 years now, and my business, Fable Foods, is about making meaty, delicious food out of mushrooms. So we particularly use shiitake mushroom, and we make a slow-cooked meat-style food. And that comes from my journey into sort of veganism, which I'm not a vegan now, but during my process of learning how sustainable mushrooms are as a food for the planet, in the last decade, I saw a lot of food waste being created, even in mushrooms, and I saw mushrooms were actually growing on byproducts in the agricultural industry. So I saw that mushrooms could be a good way of being quite a sustainable food. And taking that view, I was at the time a meat eater. I grew up in Texas, so barbecue is in my background. Barbecue is like my cultural heritage food, which is definitely, eating lots and lots of meat. But I'd go home from working on the mushroom farm and seeing, eating a steak or eating a burger and knowing that costs a lot of resources to make that food. So in my thinking, I thought, really we need to be making an effort to sustain the planet and to sustain the food system. So in my view, I thought maybe the right thing for me to do at the time was to go vegan. So I did go 100% vegan for a year. That was a promise to myself, and you can't lie to yourself, So I did it for a month. The first was let's go vegan for a month, and I did it with a friend. And 2 weeks in, it was so difficult, giving up meat, giving up dairy, giving up everything, and I felt very, very bad. But I made the promise to go for 1 month, and by the end of the month, we felt really, really good. Felt really clean, and this is a good way of doing. A mission to help, sustainability and things like that. So we decided at 1 month to go for 3 months. But I know that first 2 weeks, so you go in and out, and I felt terrible. I was like, I'm never going to go in and out of this. I'm going to be a vegan for 3 months. So I did it for 3 months, and I worked in the fruit and veg wholesale market at the time. So it made it very possible for me to eat lots of colors, lots of different foods. So I felt really good and clear and healthy. Made it to 3 months, let's do 6 months. Made it to 6 months, let's do 1 year. But in month 8 of that journey, that promise, I went back to my home in Texas. And I realized that I'm the one who chose to go vegan. Nobody else chose that. And it left me out of my family whenever I went back if I chose not to participate in the cultural heritage food. So, whenever I went back, I realized very quickly I'm only torturing myself by not consuming. So I did while I was there. But whenever I came back to Australia, I said I'm going to finish my 1 year, but I really need to focus on making something that you can use as an experience, that you can use in the place of the traditional animal protein for someone like me who has a barbecue in their cultural heritage. So that's what I really focused on and developed the early versions of, my product Fable, which is like, in my view, I made it like barbecue. I made it to be replicating those sorts of things. But every culture has a cultural heritage food, and a lot of them have that traditional slow-cooked meat style. That's what I did with shiitake mushrooms. So that was our sort of flagship product, and that's really my most recent and biggest product that's selling sort of in Australia, the United Kingdom, and our newest market, the USA. We also have some presence in Malaysia and Singapore. But yeah, that's Fable. That's like what I'm doing now. But I had a long sort of journey into it. First in Texas, I was a chemical engineering student. Coming out of West Texas, there's a lot of oil. And I didn't want to go work in the oil field. I wanted to do the smart science behind it and go to university and get a chemical engineering degree and then work in a lab, make a lot of money and not have to go to the oil field. But of course, life takes its own turns. I was a fine dining chef while I was going to school for chemical engineering. Whenever I got that degree, I never went into the field. I happened to marry an Australian woman. We met online. She moved to America. We've had a couple of kids together. We applied for a visa to move back to Australia, but the visa took a very long time. During the time waiting for the visa, she got a job opportunity out in California. And I decided, well, let's go out there, still wait for the visa, but I don't want to be a chef anymore. There's no jobs for chemical engineers out there because I'm leaving the oil fields in West Texas. So I'll just go get a job in the meantime. And when I did, I went and got a job on a mushroom farm in the North Bay area of San Francisco. It rains 9 months out of the year
So
there.
you work in the mushroom farm too?
Yeah, that was my first really exposure. So as a chef, I got exposure to different culinary types of mushrooms. As a fine dining chef, I got exposed to morels and chanterelles and porcini and all these nice exotic style mushrooms.
Those are the wild mushrooms.
Well, yeah,
So
exactly.
they are found in Australia too?
Yeah, only in Australia, the ones that you find, the wild ones that you can eat, are only growing under northern hemisphere trees that have been imported to Australia because Australia has a very short culinary history. So they have no long history of safe use of the Australian native fungi. But we imported a bunch of pine trees from the northern hemisphere to grow, timber. And then under these pine trees, you can find, some culinary edible mushrooms that have all their books from the north, So in Australia, yes, you can. And it's very rare to find porcinis and it's, chanterelles and things like that. They're very high price over there.
Well, that's a very detailed explanation about yourself. I drafted few questions for you to, as a audience, a Planet Mushroom audience and Indian people.
Yeah.
So those are connected with the Indian, obviously. My first question for you is, Jim, you started as a fine dining chef and trained mycologist. What led you from kitchen to co-founding the Pebble Food Company?
Yeah, well, that's kind of where this journey started, that there in California. I found a job on the mushroom farm and everything sort of changed for me. I knew that I was always going to be involved with mushrooms from that sort of moment because I lived and worked on a Japanese bottle system farm. You'd be familiar with what they are.
Yeah, no. Which mushroom they grow in the bottle farm?
That we had 6 different culinary varieties, so king oyster, blue oyster.
It was in Australia only?
No, that was in California. So this was while I was waiting for my visa. And when we moved out to California, I decided not to go be a chef and not to do chemical engineering and just go find a job. And I found a job on a mushroom farm. So I started working there. They had 6 different culinary varieties, 47 different nutraceutical varieties. Like, my chemical mind was going crazy with all this functional food, and I was a fine dining chef, so I had exposure to all these different types of mushrooms that were growing. So my food brain was going crazy. And then it was Japanese bottle farm, which is like the Cadillac, clockwork timing. You put raw materials in one end, there's machines, and it makes carpets of mushrooms out the other end. So my engineering brain was turned on. And not only did I live and work on the mushroom farm, but in the North Bay area of San Francisco, it rains 9 months out of the year. So I took the hobby of mushroom picking and learning about their culinary history and all those sorts of things. So that really led me to wanting to become a mushroom scientist. Eventually, I moved to Australia, and I said, okay, definitely not going to be a chef anymore. Definitely, I had been accepted in chemistry, but I didn't want to do chemistry anymore. So I went and got a new degree in agricultural science, focusing on mycology. Started up a little mushroom farm, started selling mushrooms to the fruit and veg wholesale market, and went down that path. That led me to getting a degree, and then do I want to do science and, cure cancer? Or do I want to go grow mushrooms and make a lot of money? And that's kind of where I ended up starting a very large mushroom business in Australia, not knowing the mushroom market in Australia. I had a massive failure. I grew way too many enoki mushrooms. And I spent a lot of money, big failure. I needed to go work for somebody to get out of debt. And so I went to work for the largest mushroom farm in the Southern Hemisphere, Costa Mushrooms. That was they had an Amicel spawn lab there. And there we grew 18 tons of spawn a week, lots and lots of spawn production. And, that was the same job that I was doing when I was working in California, but I was doing a different type of spawn. So I came over here, did spawn. Then eventually I got back to say, I want to go back into mushrooms. And then I started working with a local mushroom farmer to do some fermentations and to make some mushrooms foods out of the byproducts. And that's when I chose to go vegan. And that's where the sort of idea of taking mushroom farm waste, like the stems, byproducts, and turning them into food came about. And me and a co-founder went out looking for some money to turn mushrooms into meaty, delicious food. So it's a long journey from all of those things, but that's what led me there.
Jim, what was that one aha moment where you realized that mushroom could change to the food industry?
It was whenever I realized that on this mushroom farm that I'm working on in the Southern Hemisphere, 350 tons of agaricus mushrooms they grew a week. They grew that from 1,500 tons of wheat straw a week. So you see agricultural byproduct making food. But then they also had 75 tons of stems a week. And all of that was food. It just had a little soil attached to it. And then they paid somebody to take that away and put it into a compost pile on the field that said, something's broken in the food system here. And mushroom are nature's recyclers. We already know that they can take some of our agricultural byproduct and turn it into food. We've got a little thing here where the mushrooms are also having a byproduct. We can turn that into food. So that was my thinking of there's a little bit missing there. You can turn mushrooms into compost, but the food bit is actually energy that humans can consume. They already produce compost where you grow mushrooms from, and you can use that compost to grow plants from. So a little bit missing from the chain there. I thought, this could really help to go into the protein cycle and to help actually offset the amount of resources you need to consume the traditional protein sources. So mushrooms could actually, because mushrooms, they've got a meaty texture, and people talk about mushrooms as meaty. But I think we can talk a little bit more about how that texture and structure is really misunderstood. But it was about seeing that there was something that exists there that was not properly used in the cycle. It was a wasted resource in something that's so already resource fixing for the food system. So that was my aha moment.
And you trained as a mycologist. What are the 3 top things about mushrooms that most people misunderstand or overlook?
Yeah, okay. Well, mine are all going to be culinary.
Only top 3.
Yeah. Mine will only be culinary. Because when you study mycology, mycology can be for agriculture, mycology can be for pathology, all kinds of stuff like that. But mine are going to be culinary, right? Mushrooms are just totally misunderstood on how to cook them. And that's really about 2 different things. So I'll take 2 of my top 2 as taste of mushroom
Okay.
and texture of mushroom cooking.
Mhm.
So people, follow the method. They think they understand it, and they cook them like vegetables. And they see that the result isn't always that great. Something gray and rubbery. And a lot of people can really think of one time at least where a, they've had a meal with mushrooms in it, and they just didn't love it. Something about it was just too chewy, too wet, too rubbery, too slippery.
Same happen in India.
Absolutely.
And we need chefs to resolve these issues.
Well, you don't need chefs to resolve this issue. You just need to understand the food. And this is the misunderstanding, is that it's not a vegetable. Mushrooms are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. And we are more closely related to mushrooms than either of us are related to plants. So we should not cook them like we cook plants, at least not the entire way. That's the major misunderstanding. And we can go into how exactly, but texture is misunderstood and taste. If you eat a raw mushroom, it tastes like a raw mushroom. You need to cook everything all the way outside to inside, and inside is a very high umami or glutamate compounds. That's the umami compound, is glutamate. It's very high because it's so closely related to traditional animal proteins that the stuff that's on the inside of the cell is the same stuff. So when you get it out and you cook it, brown it, you do the Maillard process. Some people may call it the Maillard because that's the way it's spelled. But it's a French name, so it's Maillard. And that requires amino acids, reducing sugars, and heat. Mushrooms are mainly water. So whenever you don't cook them enough, you don't get that browning. So you don't get the actual change of raw mushroom flavor to cooked mushroom flavor. And cooked mushroom flavor is the same taste as cooked traditional proteins. So those are two really big ones. So that I think those are the real hard ones to get past. And then the other is, we can leave another one. I think we've got more questions about this.
Yeah, texture and taste is sufficient. Yeah. And do you think the mushrooms are still underappreciated in the global food system, especially in India?
I can't speak for India completely. I can only tell from what you've told me and from what I see. And yeah, I see an underrepresentation here because we hear it's mainly vegetarian. Everywhere we go, I'm in the minority if I'm a non-veg eater. So it's not very often when we're traveling around that I find a menu that has non-veg options. And it blows my mind that those menus are not full of mushrooms, because mushrooms have such an umami taste. Umami isn't has anything to do with meat, but that relationship of umami to comfort and the umami to the feeling of your cultural heritage. That's such a deeply ingrained thing with humans that it's baffling that you aren't expressing umami with mushrooms in Indian cuisine. So definitely underrepresented here, because you can do so much more and then widen up the varieties of your delicious cuisine, including the mushrooms. But why is it underrepresented around the world? I think it really goes back to that my two top things before is taste and texture. People don't understand how to cook them properly. Even chefs, even mushroom people, they don't realize. I've spent the last several years of my life understanding mushroom texture, and it is so vastly different than what people think. It is so vastly different. And once you understand it, once you get it, you will make mushrooms that will transform a people's opinion no matter what. No matter what. You cook mushrooms for them when you know how to do it, and they will love the dish, and they will think this is mushrooms like they've never had before, and it's aha for them.
And do you feel that mushroom is a sustainable compared to these alternate protein sources, the
Absolutely.
regular protein sources?
Absolutely. Looking at if you were to use a whole hectare of land to grow vegetables or traditional protein or anything, mushrooms are by and large the most efficient food crop on the planet. And I'll stand by that. On 1 hectare of land, you can grow 35 tons of mushrooms in a year. You could do even more if you wanted to. And that's in a single layer. I'm not even talking about growing them in a high-rise building. One single story, you can grow that many mushrooms in a year. But if you grow potatoes or corn, you're going to be about 6 tons a year, and you're going to be on the weather cycle. Sure, you can put them indoors, but you're still going to be stuck with that 6 tons a year. If you grow cows, 1 hectare, what's that going to give you? 500 kilos a year? Actually, 250 kilos a year because you have to split it out over 2 years. But traditional proteins, very low as far as land. And then, you got to feed, if you're going to use traditional protein, you got to feed them something. They take about 10 kilos of grain for 1 kilo of meat. You know how many liters of water goes for 1 kilo of grain? 10,000 liters of water. So when you consume 1 kilo of traditional meat protein, you're consuming 10 kilos of grain. And that 10 kilos of grain is 10,000 liters of water per kilo.
That's too huge.
It's quite a bit.
And if you talk about all exotic mushrooms, like which is the most the best one you pick, the number one, and if you say like top 5 mushrooms and explain them by taste, texture, and uses, not 5, 6, 7, any like inoki, shimiji, king oyster. And one more question I have to ask you: if you want Indians to have changed from button mushroom, which is Agaricus bisporus, which mushroom will be more closer to that mushroom? So like shiitake tastes very different. It's a jump for Indians to go exactly to shiitake, which is the nearest mushroom, which is very closer to Agaricus. And can you explain few points of each mushroom? Let's say 6, 7 mushroom according to taste and uses. Like you told me that enoki is good for, like if you have you drink last like in a you drink very heavy and you have a upset your stomach, and you can have a enoki as a soup to have this. Can you explain 5, 6 mushroom in detail? Okay.
Sure. Well, agaricus is a very good mushroom, but we know that one quite well here. But there are all the different varieties of agaricus. There's portobello, that it has a more intense umami taste to it, and that's something to do with the brown and the pigment. People don't really realize that's really deep umami there. You know what? I could take off my shirt and show you all my tattoos so I can describe each one of these mushrooms, but I won't. The next one, very similar, in sort of color and almost texture, is like Pleurotus aringii, also called king oyster. King oyster is big, so farmers can get a good terms of trade on this mushroom. They get nice big fruiting body, really long shelf life, so you can put it on the shelf in storage and it lasts for a really long time. So it's good in that regard. But as far as cooking, it's nice and very chewy and meaty. So it's quite delicious, and it doesn't have a really strong sulfur or umami profile like shiitake does. You said shiitake is a big jump. It's a big jump because it's got sulfur in it. It's a big jump because it's got a really high glutamic acid. But king oyster is not so high of a jump, and you can do so much with it because it's so big. You can shape it. You can shape it into coins, or you can make slices or strips. So
scallops.
Yeah, scallops, coins, shreds, all these sorts of things. So king oyster is a really good option, and it's not too far out of the comfort zone. Oyster, people may not be familiar with oyster, but it's a really good one for farmers to grow because it grows very fast and it likes the heat. But this one is also quite forgiving for anyone cooking. You can cook it very fast because they're really thin tissues, and you don't have these big issues with being really too chewy or getting a raw taste because it's so thin, the tissue. It does your quick high heat cooking style very well, and you can supplement any sort of mock meats or your soy with actual whole food, because soy chunks, they're high process. Mushroom is a whole food. No processing, no worried about any of that sort of.
The one story you're telling about enoki, that for hangover. That's
Absolutely.
the first time I heard about. Can you tell again to our audience?
Sure. So I'm fortunate enough to travel around the world a bit to do what I do, because sourcing mushrooms from different areas, and we're producing mushrooms mainly out of Malaysia. And in this travels, you experience lots of business chats, and that's lots of drinking. And I was 43 years old before I realized that there was something in mushrooms that could actually help you prevent a hangover. And I didn't, and it really came from going out to eat in Malaysia where they have this dish called bak kut teh. And it's, it's a local dish, but it's a Chinese origin preparation. They have mushrooms in there. They have shiitake, enoki, lots of different things. And they call it herbal broth. But this was the only real different thing that I had one night before going out and having too much to drink and thinking the next day I woke up, I should have a bad hangover. But I didn't. And I thought the only thing different about that soup was that the enoki mushrooms were in there for a long time. Normally, if you have enoki mushrooms, and if your audience doesn't know them, in Asia, you use it in hot pot, but you only dip it in just for a couple of seconds because you like the crispy enoki. That's what most people like them for. And they eat them fresh for the crispiness. But in this dish, they were boiled for a long time. And when you boil them, they get really thick like a sauce. And that was really the only thing that was different. So I said, let's go again for bak kut teh. Let's get the enoki because we were going out again this next night. And again, I woke up the next morning feeling fresh as a daisy. Since then, I've gone on and I've tested enoki in a lot of different ways with a lot of different people and a lot of different alcohols. And enoki leads to if you prepare it right, leads to the ability to defend against having a hangover. So it's like really next level knowledge for people who like to drink.
That's a unique knowledge. If it is happening, it's very unique thing. Nobody, I think, believes it in this whole world. Even eating mushrooms, people don't believe it. And also, Jim, I want to ask, like, there are two types of mushroom. One grows on wood. That we call them wood-loving fungi. And one is like a fermented agaricus, but which is a regular mushroom we eat in India also. So it's like we have a different taste and taste profile in when the mushroom grows on wood substrate. And does it have a more medicinal value? Can you put some light on it?
Well, that's a really good question. So mushrooms all generally have a good medicinal value because what they have is fungal polysaccharides. So those fungal beta glucans that your body, when you eat any mushroom, your body recognizes you've just consumed a fungus. And that's potentially, for your body, they've experienced fungi before, and that's potentially a pathogen. So you mount an immune response no matter what. So even agaricus can be medicinal in that regard. The different types of substrate that mushrooms grow on, that really happened because Asia went one way with the wood mushrooms and Europe went one way with the compost growing mushrooms. They recognized, that where they put their manure and their cow, the mushrooms would grow there. So that's really why those two systems developed. But around the agaricus, that was kind of it. There was one mushroom, that's as far as they went. But they found that you can grow other compost-loving mushrooms that are quite medicinal. Agaricus brasiliensis, you've heard of that? Blasii, also quite medicinal, anti-inflammatory. So there are medicinal mushrooms that you can grow in the compost. But that might be a bit of a jump for your audience. There's the wood-loving mushrooms, and every different species of mushrooms has something interesting about it. And it's not necessarily because it's a wood-loving mushroom, it's just because of different species of mushroom. So Pleurotus ostreatus, the oyster mushrooms, they have a compound in them called lovastatin. It's the same thing that you would get if you go get cholesterol. If you have high cholesterol and the doctors give you a statin drug, I don't say that that's what you should take, but statin drugs, lovastatin, same thing is in oyster mushrooms.
Which oyster? King oyster?
Oyster, Pleurotus ostreatus. Okay. So the Pleurotus genus has lovastatin in it. So the statin drugs developed from the fungal world. How about that? It's something like cordyceps. Cordyceps, you end up with cyclosporin. This is the thing that if you get like a liver transplant or a kidney transplant, they give you anti-rejection medication. All right, so I'm just going to go right from where I was before the blackout, so people can know. Because cordyceps are literally called a zombie fungus. That's a fungus that takes over an insect, and they're species specific. So they produce compounds that suppress the immune system of the other organism. So that's where you can derive the cyclosporin for us to actually use to, suppress the host graft disease thing where you want to reject somebody else's liver or somebody else's kidney that you just put in your body. So that's why cordyceps are cool. And you got lots of other wood-loving mushrooms that go far back with traditional Chinese medicine. So you'd know, like Ganoderma, Lingzi, right? They have Ganodermans. They have some alpha glucans. They're known as the mushroom of long life, the fountain of youth mushrooms. You end up with things that have really high fungal beta glucan. In the first I told you, agaricus even has beta glucan. But you have things like turkey tail, they have really high fungal beta glucan. So you look at every different species of mushroom, and it's some sort of compound that's produced only by that mushroom that can be quite beneficial for humans. There's other ones that are quite not beneficial, You get the toxic mushrooms, and they're producing the things that will actually melt your liver, or the ones that will make your brain see the purple stuff on the other side of the universe,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
And my question for you is, how did you develop the texture and umami depth in fable mushroom-based meat? And even I have tasted it, so meaty. And I
Yeah.
haven't tasted a vegan product made of mushrooms so meaty. Even shiitake mushroom doesn't taste as good as your fable food.
Yeah.
Can you explain a few points? What was the R&D journey like?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I told you that I came from this from the angle of I grew up in a meat-loving world, and I wanted to replicate the experience of eating the slow-cooked culture food. And every culture has that. So it really needed to have mouth-coating succulence. As soon as you put it in your mouth, you get that. And it needed to have the tear, because us humans, are primal primates. You want arr. So that's part of it. And I wanted it to get stuck in your teeth. So after you've eaten it, you need to do what you would do if you just had a traditional protein. So the best mushroom for me to use was shiitake, because it has very long fibers. And those very long fibers, fiber is one of those weird words because it can mean so many different things. But when you talk about traditional proteins like muscle fibers are not fiber. They're protein strands, right? But they're aligned like fibers. Shiitake has the fibers that are actual fiber, but they're aligned in that fibrous way. Where if you use the cap, it's quite different. It's kind of squishy and fatty feeling. But if you use the stem, it's aligned fibers, just like you would find in muscle tissue or in traditional proteins. So using that, I can use the very robust fibers and sort of change the flavors with normal, typical cooking practices, and sort of remove sort of that really heavy, sulfury shiitake note, which a lot of people say shiitake is so strong. It takes a little bit of cooking. And then once I get rid of that, I can then shred them up and sort of put them together in a way that it leads to a chef being able to cook it just like his home preparation would be. And in my case, that was barbecue. But for a Greek person, that might be roast lamb, or for a Korean, it might be like a bulgogi, or for a Chinese person, that might be stir fry. Another Northern American, it might be cheesesteak. So you go to every different place, and you can turn the product that I've made, which is like a base meaty format, because it's just got those protein-like fibers that are meaty. And when you say meaty, you can mean both texture and taste. I made sure that they have that, as well as the fat that goes along with that meaty experience. So you can use it in all those different formats. And that's the R&D journey was about getting all of that right. Not just one of them, not just bite it and it chews like meat, or not just bite it and it squirts meat taste in your mouth. It's meaty in all those ways. That's why it works so well in all the different cuisines, especially Mexican, especially Indian.
Yeah, I've tasted your products. The shreds almost stuck in between the teeth, and even I suggest you to send the toothpick with your packages.
Yeah, good idea.
I haven't seen that this kind of because I am a member of plant-based food also, so I keep tasting the foods, vegan foods in India. So, but this kind of level of almost it mimics the meat.
Yeah.
And I have a question that what role do culinary techniques versus scientific methods play in your product development?
Well, yeah, it's very important for us founders together, when we decided what we want to do, is we don't want to do sci-fi woo-woo. We want to do whole food as whole food as possible, but make it a meaty experience. So We won't be using things like methyl cellulose to glue things together to give you the meaty experience. We're actually going to take a meaty product and just let it show off its meatiness. And that's where mushrooms are. That's why we choose mushrooms in the first place. We won't choose soy protein that's been extruded or any other type of protein because that is sci-fi. To me, that's super sci-fi. You take all these little proteins that are floating around in a vegetable, then you isolate them in a process, and then you melt them in some sort of a high moisture extrusion pressure thing where you melt the proteins so that then they align like fibers. Well, we won't do that. We're going to take a food that evolved in its own way to have a structure that already mimics meat. That way, you're eating a whole food. We've just cooked it. We didn't do a whole lot of science. We did a whole lot of thinking and then prepared it in a way so that when you bit into it, mouth-coating succulents, chewy, meaty tear, got stuck in your teeth. I didn't need to scientifically engineer that. That was already done. I just let it shine. That's all I did.
And why did you select shiitake? You might try it with other mushrooms too.
Yeah.
And why you settled for the shiitake one?
The shiitake really has that fiber, those really dense fibers that are aligned in the stem, and that comes from the way that they grow. Even the shiitake that grow in the summer, where they grow really fast in the heat, they don't have the nice dense fibers that I want. It's the cool weather growing shiitake that really grows slow, nice and dense and firm, and that gives me something to really play with whenever I want to have the tough chew that you would go through in trying to replicate, a meaty experience that you'd get from the traditional protein. So shiitake was a natural first choice. Plus, it's one of the top produced mushrooms in the world. Second only to agaricus. Agaricus is number one. That's because China started growing it about 12 years ago, and now it's number one in China. And then shiitake is number two, and that's because shiitake was number one in China until agaricus came along, and it's still number two.
And you often talk about food as medicine and sustainable eating. How do mushroom fit in that larger picture?
Well, sustainable eating really comes down to we don't need to do a lot to our food as far as science, or we don't need to mix a lot of things together that we don't have long histories of using. So sustainability really comes down to, is it sustainably healthy? Is it sustainably going to be used as a food source? So mushrooms already are a big yes. If we're developing new foods, it's a tough one to say that new food that you develop to be the best thing that you can digest is actually good for you. I don't know if it's psychologically or nutritionally or whatever. But yeah, I think food is and should be medicine. We shouldn't be consuming all these things that we make to be like something else. We should be consuming whole foods, and mushrooms are a great way to consume a whole food and to have a meaty experience, center of plate. And you don't even need, if you come from a cultural background that was very dependent on meat, you don't even feel like you need it if you've cooked the mushrooms in a right way. And you don't need something else to pretend to be the meat. Mushrooms already do it. They're very close. So for me, food is medicine. Mushrooms are that.
And do you believe fungi can solve some of the planet's biggest challenges, climate, nutrition, agriculture?
Absolutely. So this is obviously a place where people go to biomimicry to get the best designs. The stealth bomber looks like a bird. And, you look at biomimicry for the best answers because evolution has already done it. And mushrooms have been on the surface of the earth as the longest, the first pioneer that went out all over the surface of the earth. So they've been doing it for quite a long time. And they are an untapped resource for all the ways of maintaining resources and the sustainable effort to keep rolling stocks of sunlight captured as food and keep it in the system, move it from one to the other. Whenever a tree falls in the woods, there's a different type of mushroom goes in and decomposes that. You look at these systems and they have it all figured out. If it wasn't for mushrooms, we wouldn't even be here, for one. But they are a model organism for basically everything we want to do. And now we're even getting into biomaterials design, like mushroom leather. There are cars that are driving around that have leather on their seats that have been grown. It's leather feels just like if you took it from an animal, but it came from a mushroom. Again, mushrooms are so closely related to animals that you can you can use them in those ways. And then extracts for those really strong medicinal compounds that we've already kind of talked about, but nowhere near have we even scratched the surface. You look at sort of cordyceps, there's 4 different target therapeutic compounds in there, and you can isolate and you can do all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, we can look at mushrooms, fermentation, extracts, biomaterials, building materials. People are making houses out of mushrooms that are fire resistant, flame retardant, insulative properties, they dampen sound. So we have so much area to look for mushrooms to do something for us. And if we are going to be what Elon Musk says, an interplanetary species, and we're going to go live on Mars, we have to figure out a way to feed ourselves on the way there. Well, mushrooms are a really good idea because they recycle all this waste and you can make food from them. And you might even have people on that spaceship that came from a cultural background that loves barbecue. And if they want barbecue on a spaceship, I guarantee you they're not going to be taking cows, but they might take mushrooms, and we can make barbecue from the mushrooms that we grew from the waste that was generated on the spaceship on the way to Mars. So yeah, absolutely. Mushrooms are a great way to get many different things.
And where do you see the plant-based food industry, especially mushroom-based products, going in next 10 years?
Yeah. I see that a lot of the mock foods, the things that are developed, really scientifically developed and not really food, but they make it into food, I think that that's going to wane. People are going to want more whole food. And it's already sort of happened with Gen 1 plant-based. You know, they looked at it and said, oh, well, there's 50 ingredients in this product that says it's duck. Or duck, mock chicken, whatever. There's 50 ingredients in there. And that has mainly been turned away. People said, I don't really want all of those things that I can't read and I can't pronounce. So mushrooms are a very clear whole food answer to people who want to eat plant-based food but also still have the meaty, delicious, traditional cultural foods that are never going to change, right? The cultural heritage foods exist, and a lot of them are based on meat. And a lot of old people like to pass their culture down to their young people, and they're always going to want to do that. And mushrooms are going to be a way that allow us to continue to do that beyond resources being too scarce, so that meat prices go to hundreds of dollars a kilo. Mushrooms are never going to do that because we're always going to have waste supplies that we can grow mushrooms on.
And this question is basically about your food, the Fable food I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Who are your main customer or target audience for Fable? Are they flexitarian, vegans, chefs, or someone else?
Yeah, well, I answer that with all of those are the right answer. You know, there's an easy, fast market with the vegans. Vegans want vegan food. Vegans love mushrooms. That's great. But flexitarians are the main sort of big market. They're willing to, you know, eat less meat, but they still love the taste of meat. And yeah, okay, they might say I'll have a meat-free Monday, but they're happy to eat capsicum and potato on that day. But if you want to have them eating less meat more often, having a meaty experience available for them makes that choice a lot easier. So flexitarians are a really nice big audience. And if you can just put the product in the menu and not really have to say plant-based or vegan, that is going to be the winner, because you can just say shiitake burger or shiitake carnitas or shiitake tacos. People will say, dang, that sounds like it's an interesting dish, rather than plant-based vegan mock duck. That's just like canceling that order. It's never going to happen. So I see that happening.
And recently, Tesla announced its India entry. Do you see Fable food entering the Indian market too?
Well, if I got out my crystal ball, I'd say India is a really big market. And what we've discussed already is that maybe a little bit mushroom scared. So it might be hard to make that messaging right. And we've just recently put effort into the U.S. market launch. So I think that's going to take a lot of our effort over the next couple of years. But if we had some very smart marketing, some very smart partners here, I would say that distribution into India, if it was handled properly, it could be done as soon as next week. But we just need the right distribution partners for them to really take it and message it to the Indian population, because we don't know how to speak to the Indian population. But there may be people listening to this podcast that might. And yeah, come at me.
And what is the main purpose of your visit to India? Any collaboration, any R&D goals?
Yeah, well, it's a little tongue in cheek when you say that because I came to visit you, and with absolute experimental research and development in mind. And I can't share all of it, but it is taking the skills that you've developed over your long career that I respect and acknowledge, and combining them with the skills that I have developed over my long career, and then making some sort of a nice play towards doing a volume, very low cost byproduct that I can use to make more of what I'm making, because I'm going to run out of raw material at the growth pattern that we're at. And that means that I need to use techniques that you know how to do very well and combine them with techniques that I know how to do very well, and then make up some very novel and some might say crazy ideas. Your technical partner in your business has already said impossible, and I said, don't worry, everything has been said it's impossible until I did it. So let's do it together.
Any upcoming surprises or new innovation you are working on at Fable?
Yeah, well, we have recently just let out the texturization process that I invented. So I've been working with mushroom texture for my entire food career in Fable, and texturization has been the big thing. And every chef does some form of texturization. You know, if he's cooking cauliflower, he wants to put a crust on it. That changes the texture, right? Well, I'm thinking about that in terms of making mushrooms into a different texture than just a wet mushroom texture. And I've found a way to do it. I found a way to do it very efficiently, and we're using that in our new markets to reduce the amount of meat that's required to make meat dishes. So it's like an infusion. So that's what it's called, shiitake infusion. And a burger that's being sold now may have up to 50 to 70% shiitake in it instead of meat. And when we've tested that out amongst thousands of people, over 75% or more prefer the shiitake infused burger for its meatiness. So it improves the meatiness of burgers, but not only that, improves sustainability, improves health profile, reduces fat, reduces all those other things, and reduces the really high resource requiring meat part. So yeah, I'd say that that's pretty exciting. And then there's, of course, the thing that we are probably going to invent that is the system that rides on the spaceship to Mars eventually one day. But we can't talk too much about that one.
And now I'm shifting all the focus to Indian spirituality.
Oh, yeah.
My first question is, do you feel Indian spirituality or cultural beliefs connect with mushroom in some way?
Yeah, so I've long known about the story of the soma, and an author, R. Gordon Wasson, has said that the soma, this elixir that gives you immediate enlightenment, is very likely to be based on a mushroom called the Amanita muscaria. That's the red one with the white dots. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's always a cool story. That mushroom, Amanita muscaria, has a really cool story no matter where you go on the planet. And it does have some psychedelic benefits. It also has some very health benefits, you know, so it's got all these interesting benefits. And then when you look at the different mythologies around the world and the different symbology that's in the spiritual traditions, India is full of them and has so many references that could very well be interpreted as having a mushroom-based origin. So I didn't really think about it too much before coming, but then I saw, you know, some YouTube videos on the way in, just kind of looking at it, and then I sort of went down the rabbit hole, and I do believe that, there is some of the symbology, some of the mythology is very, very closely related to how you might describe something that had an origin from not only mushrooms, but the ones that can alter your states of consciousness.
And you once mentioned Lord Shiva and Soma. Do you believe Soma was actually mushroom? Can you expand on the perspective? Is it Lord Shiva connected to mushrooms?
Well, again, this comes to that symbology, right? And I don't, if I'm betting, man, I would bet that a culture of people who are evolving from primates who who band together and understand all of the ingredients that are in the woods around them because they're hunters and gatherers. They're going to be intimately familiar with, the things that feed them, the things that can help them when they're hurt. And they're going to be aware of the substances that are in their environment that give them altered states of mind. And of course they would know that, that mushroom over there, that's toxic. It killed, that guy, so we won't eat that one. That one there is great food. You got to cook it for a long time. But that one there makes you see different colors, and you see these mandalas, and you see all these different things. So let's put that one aside and only maybe consume that every once in a while, and we'll all talk about what we see. And if you really look at the symbology there, those mushrooms grow on cow dung, and they're blue. They bruise blue. So Shiva's a blue god, and he comes on a cow or a bull. Sorry, the name of the cow.
Nandi.
Nandi the bull. And these are sacred animals here. They are the origin of magic mushrooms, without a doubt. That is a true statement. It doesn't mean that magic mushrooms became part of a mythology, but if you're thinking about the way that a mythology can be created, and you talk about the way that a story can be built, there's a lot of symbology around such things, and this is only a scratch on the surface of what symbology lines up, because Shiva has a lot of different names. And there's a red version of Shiva, Rudra, and we can say that this guy has hundreds of heads and thousands of eyes. And if you think of this red mushroom with thousands of eyes on it, you might be thinking that this is related to the god of Soma, Somesh. Soma is this elixir of life, and Ishkar, Somishkar, this is the word that I've learned. Somishkar is also a name for Shiva, the god of the Soma, the blue-throated god who can transmute poisons and make them into this elixir of knowledge and life, the ambrosia that can give you immediate enlightenment. Yeah, so there's a big bunny hole to go down, and I'm not going to say I'm professional at any of the knowledge, but when you look at the symbology, and I've looked at symbology all over the world, a lot of it does look like it could come from a story that you might tell if you were sitting around a campfire and you had all just eaten magic mushrooms.
So you put so much light on Lord Shiva, like I have to go back to the books and study my religion altogether again.
Yes.
And recently you make a visit to Kanchi Dham, and it's known for Lord Hanuman.
Yeah.
So famous personalities like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg visited Kanchi Dham, believing it holds a special spirituality energy. You have now made the same journey.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel it was opened your mind spiritually as well?
2 days ago, if you asked me that this was a journey that I should take, I wouldn't have said that that's something that I wanted to do or even knew about. But because we had an extra day, we did such good conversations early in our visit, you encouraged me to go there. And it was a 14-hour journey, and we did go. And I experienced, I don't want to say that I experienced enlightenment or I experienced anything over the top. It was a nice experience. I went with Amit, your partner, and he told me about what you would do when you get there. So we went to visit the place of Neem Karoli Baba, who had a blanket that was his, that he wore, and he had a disciple there. And I offered my bracelet to be blessed. Mm-hmm. And, Amit offered his blanket, and he said, that's what you do. That's great. Now the energy has been given. And I thought, this is a really nice thing. It's great. Now I've got this, and I can believe that I've got the energy. On the way out, I went to the shop and got a book by Baba Ram Das that was a compilation of all the stories, and I've looked into that only a few pages, and I'm fascinated. We also went to the gift shop, and you see I'm wearing all this jewelry. I picked up a ring, and I looked and I saw this little token with Lord Hanuman.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely looking for mushroom-related symbols, right? And he's got this pyramid in his hand. It looks like a pyramid.
It's a part Himalayan part.
Yeah, well, I asked
part of mountain.
Amit, what is that? It looks like a mushroom. He says, no, it's actually a mountain. But I'll tell you a story. He says, it is where Lord Hanuman took the whole Himalayan mountain to a doctor to help somebody with some medical problem because the Himalayan mountain has cordyceps sinensis. Now, I love cordyceps. I've made a business out of cordyceps in Australia, cordyceps gunnii. You can even see there's a tattoo on my arm here. That is an actual size of a cordyceps gunnii. He tells me this story, cordyceps sinensis in Lord Hanuman's hand. I think that is so cool. I'm going to take it. So from Neem Karoli Baba's gift shop, I took this token. And we drove back, and, I got nothing else out of the day. We drove back and went straight to bed. We didn't go anywhere else. We went straight to bed. That night I went to sleep, and for the first time in years, I've had so many dreams. And, of course, this may be just excitement. This just may be whatever. But in some of these dreams, I dreamt about food and family and, so many things. It felt like I had hundreds of dreams. One of them was me sitting and laughing with Neem Karoli Baba. And as soon as I told that to Amit when I woke up, he says, "You were visited in your dream?" And I said, "Well, I didn't see it in that way, but yeah, I guess you could." And he says, "Oh, you've been blessed." And then you called me before I had a chance to look at my phone, and I said, yeah, no, I had these dreams. And you said, yeah, that's interesting, but let's wait and see if the profits for your business quadruple, and then you'll know that you've had a blessing. Okay, then I look at my phone, and during the night while I was asleep, somebody had put through an order to me for cordyceps in Australia that I sell for a pretty good price, pretty high price. He's already been sold this year. This guy only ever buys mushrooms from me once a year, and he buys a certain amount every year without fail, and that's it one time. He's already got them this year. Now, he's asked me for 4 times that amount to be delivered as soon as possible, top grade, top price. This is coincidence, maybe. I don't know if it's magic or not, but I feel like there may be some sort of this alignment or blessing or something. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and keep this bracelet on now. And if somebody that I know feels down or sick, I'll let them have this because it's already done something for me. Maybe it's done something, at least with my energy, and I feel quite good even just talking about it. So maybe I've been blessed. I don't know.
And for the people who doesn't know about this cordyceps sinensis, which is found in Himalayan, it's called kida jadi in Hindi, in our language, and it's the most expensive mushroom in the entire planet Earth. So Jim is already doing business into this, but his mushroom is cordyceps gunnii. It's little bit different than cordyceps sinensis, little bigger than. It's almost double the size of cordyceps sinensis. And one more question: your Instagram handles is named Jim Boils Mushrooms.
Yeah.
Why do you strongly recommend boiling mushroom first? What changes in their texture, nutrition? What we do that like?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I talk about this at length on other podcasts, and it takes a long time to discuss the entire science. And you should go to my Instagram to look at some of the videos I got. So Jim Boils Mushrooms, one word. And I talk about why, but it's really about getting that taste and texture to their maximum. So I told you should not cook mushrooms like you cook vegetables. And if you think about the way you cook a vegetable, if you boil it for too long, it becomes mush. And even in the name mushroom, it says mush. So no one would ever think boiling is the right thing to do. But the reason it's the right thing to do is because it's got such a strong physical matrix, and it's called chitin. The polysaccharide cell wall that's in a mushroom is called chitin. The one that's in a plant, like a potato or a asparagus, that's called cellulose. Now, when you boil those things, they go to mush, they come apart from each other, and you can make soup from them. But mushrooms, you can boil them for days. You can boil them for days, and they're never going to come apart. They just get to an equilibrium. And that's what you really need to do, because once you boil them, you pop all those cells, and they deflate, and they push out all this flavorful liquid. But it tastes like a raw mushroom until you reduce the liquid away, and then you put that heat in. If you go back to what I said about Maillard, the Maillard reaction, Maillard, amino acids, reducing sugars, and heat. With all the water around, there's not enough heat. You need to go to about 150 degrees. So as soon as you get the water away, Now you can push the heat. And now and only now should you start putting some oil. You know, you put a little bit of oil, it's going to stay on the outside. It'll no longer get sucked in. It'll stay on the outside. It'll push the heat in. And that's when you start getting that browning reaction, changing all of those glutamates and those really meaty flavors. So you get the best texture because you're driving the moisture away from the inside, and you get the best meaty taste because you're changing those glutamates and those other flavor compounds into the exact same ones that are existent when you cook a traditional protein. So definitely boiling is the right way to go, but don't stop right as soon as you boiled. After you've boiled, that's when you start your normal process. You start your cooking with ghee or cooking with oil and then adding in other things. So definitely boil your mushrooms.
Is important. And at Planet Mushroom, we are on a mission to get more Indians to eat mushrooms regularly and to introduce them to wide variety of mushrooms type through accessible everyday options. From your global perspective, what do you think it takes to shift public perception and make mushroom a mainstream food choice, especially in a cultural diverse country like India?
It is going to take the thought leaders, the people who are the leaders of, culinary thought, to really put these in your traditional dishes. That's my firm belief, because if I ate the same version of lamb rogan josh, but with the shiitake mushroom used instead, I would be the believer that that is the delicious version, and it didn't require an animal. And then the people who would normally not eat that non-veg option could eat it with mushrooms. So I think it's going to come down to your social influencers and your thought leaders around what's new, what's good, and mushrooms are the answer, not just the sustainable answer, not just the biomaterials answer. They're the answer for all of these different flavors that you haven't even had the experience of yet. So you've got this wide open playing field. A culturally diverse place like India is the wonderful place to do it because you've got all these cultural traditional foods that you can just put mushrooms straight into once you've boiled them and treated them first.
And what's the one mushroom you go for? If we go give you a selection that among 20 mushrooms, what is the one main mushroom you will go for? Only one.
Ooh, that's a tough one. And if they're all there, and let's say morel's there, I'm taking morel. If morel's not there, then I'm going to take the next best one, right? But morel, if that's on the menu, I'm taking morel.
Okay, and shiitake is obviously, I think, is giving
Shiitake
business.
is very high on that list. If morel's not on the list, shiitake is very high on the list because I can do so much with shiitake. But I absolutely love morels, and they're so high value.
We call Gucci in India.
Gucci mushroom. Yeah.
And Jin, thank you very much joining us today. And it was pleasure to come to India. And we will have more dinner and lunch with Indian foods. And thanks for coming.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much for the hospitality. Thanks for the spiritual journey. Thanks for the enlightenment. And thank you very much for your friendship.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.